So in today's lesson, we now need to learn how to multiply polynomials, and then we need to divide polynomials. So remember that a polynomial has a number. We call this number a coefficient. And right behind the coefficient, there's a variable part. We can use x or a, any variable. And that variable must have a power. Let's use 2. This part is what we call the variable part. In order to multiply polynomials, multiply the coefficients. Example, 5x to the third times 6x to the fourth. We multiply the coefficients and we add the powers. Okay, that's if the variable are the same. Okay, so let's circle the coefficients. 5 is our first coefficient, and 6 is our second coefficient. And our powers, the first power is 3, and the second power is 4. Notice that the bases are exactly the same. So we know we need to add the powers. So the answer would equal 5 times 6 is 30. Multiply these two together. And then keep the variable the same and add the powers. 4 plus 3 equals 7. Okay, now we're going to need to look at our first example. We have -3. That's our coefficient, x to the 5th power. But we need to multiply it not by one polynomial, but by 2 polynomials. Okay, so we use parentheses when there's more than one. The first polynomial is -3 coefficient, x to the 6th power. That's the first polynomial. Now we have another one. The second polynomial has a coefficient of -12, and x is raised to the 4th power. We first need to multiply -3 x to the 5th power by -3 x to the 6th power. This will equal multiply a -3 times a -3, and that gives us a +9 coefficient. And then we add the exponents. 5 plus 6 is 11. And we keep the variable the same. Okay, we have one more polynomial that we need to multiply by negative 3x to the fifth. So we have negative 3x to the fifth. Whoops, wrong color. Times our second coefficient is negative 12x to the fourth. I multiply the coefficients negative 3 times negative 12, which gives me 36. And then I add the 5 plus the 4 to get x to the ninth. And then in the end, I just put them together. The final answer is 9x to the 11th. And since 36 is positive, I put positive 36x to the ninth. This is called my answer. Our next example is number 6. Now we have one polynomial. The coefficient, if you don't see it, is always a 1. So remember that it's a 1. You can write it, but you don't have to. Our second polynomial is just a number. There is no variable part behind that. Because there's two polynomials, you will see a parentheses now. And your job is to multiply this by two polynomials. Some people call this a binomial. We have a negative 2 as our coefficient, and our variable is x. The second polynomial just has a coefficient, but no variable part. Since there's two polynomials in the first set and two polynomials in the second set, we should have a total of 4 polynomials, starting with positive 1x times negative 2x. We do the exact same thing. We multiply the coefficients. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. And then what we do is we add the exponents. If you don't see an exponent, it means that it's a 1. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Since we've already multiplied the first polynomial times the first polynomial, we now need to multiply the first times the second polynomial. So we have 1x times positive 6. Notice that the second polynomial does not have a variable part. So all we do is multiply the coefficients. 1 times 6 is 6. And then we just carry over the variable. We don't add the powers because there are no variable parts in the second polynomial. Now that we're done with the first polynomial, we now need to multiply the second polynomial. Our second polynomial is negative 11 times negative 2x, then negative 11 times positive 6. We have in our first polynomial just a coefficient, negative 11. Then we have to multiply that to our second polynomial, negative 2x. we proceed the same way. Multiply the coefficients together. Negative 11 times negative 2 is positive 22. And then we can't add the exponents because negative 11 has no variable part. So that letter just gets carried over. And finally, we have our last polynomial to multiply. Negative 11 must be multiplied to positive 6. Notice that neither one has a variable part. So don't write a variable for the last polynomial. We simply multiply the coefficients. Negative 11 times 6 equals negative 66. Okay. Since the two polynomials in the middle are like terms, we add the coefficients, but we keep the variable part the same. 6 plus 22 will equal 28x. Okay, now that we've added all the like polynomials, we're gonna need to just write them on a line. In other words, write them together. So let's copy and then paste and write this on a line. So we have as our final answer negative 2x squared plus 28 is positive, so we have to keep the plus sign, x, and then the negative 66 is last. And here is my final answer. So now the second objective is dividing polynomials. And we're only going to learn how to divide by one polynomial. We call one a monomial. Okay? So, if I have 5x to the third power, and you have to divide by 5x to the second power, the rule is exactly the same, except you will divide the coefficients. So let's write the rule. You will divide the coefficient, and then you will subtract the powers. So you divide, then subtract. If there's more than one, then you do it one at a time. And so our final answer would be 5 divided by 5 is 1. And we subtract the exponents 3 minus 2. Of course, the variable stays the same. And then 3 take away 2 is 1. Now this only works if, again, if the variables are the same. Okay, I will do number 14. Keep in mind, we can only divide one at a time. Number 14 has 64 s t to the sixth. That's our first polynomial. And then we have minus our second polynomial, 10, but just a t this time, to the 10th power. And then we have plus 25, and then we've got the s. Oh, I wrote the 6. There was a 6 behind 5. So it's 256 st to the 5th. And we have to divide all of these polynomials one at a time, by the coefficient 8 s t to the 5th. Okay, we must divide the first polynomial, 64 st to the 6th power. We must divide that by 8 s t to the 5th power. We're gonna divide 64 by 8 and get 8. And then what we do is we subtract the powers on the variables that are the same. 1 take away 1 is 0. So that means there's no more s's. They cross out. And then 6 subtract 5 is 1. Let me pause. Okay. Our next polynomial is negative 10 t to the 10th power divided by 8 s t to the 5th power. We divide the coefficients, but negative 10 divided by 8 doesn't go in evenly, so we just reduce it. We know that 2 can go into both, and so negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5 over 8 divided by 2 is 4. Since there's no s's on the top, we must keep the s the same. The s was on the bottom, so therefore it must stay on the bottom. And so we just write the s on the bottom. But we now have the t's. 10 take away the 5 is going to be t to the 5th power, but on the top. You always write the answers on the top when you subtract the exponents. And so our okay, now the last polynomial, the 25. I don't have enough space, so I'm going to come to the side. 256 st to the 5th power needs to be divided by 8 st to the 5th power. Okay, 256 divided by 8 is 32, and since st to the 5th is exactly the same on the top and the bottom, they just get crossed out because 5 minus 5 is 0 and 1 minus 1 is 0. And now we put all of our polynomials together and write our final answer. We have 8t to the first minus 5 over 4 t to the 5th, and s is on the bottom, plus 32. And here we have our final answer.